Good evening. We're going to wait a few minutes because a few more people are joining us, but thank you for listening in so far.
I'm moving your line to main conference. One moment. Welcome and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are on a listen-only mode. During our Q&A session, you may press star 1 on your touch-tone phone if you would like to ask a question. Now I'd like to turn the meeting over to Ms. Trish Johnson. Ma'am, you may begin.
Thank you and good evening and welcome to 7 Community Air Grants post first year learning sessions. My name is Ryan Michael Atencio. This is my colleague Rachel Palatin, and we're going to be presenting information here in this learning session for the program staff that are charged with implementing Air Grants program. Thanks, Trish. Additionally, there are folks on the call-in line, and if you have a question or comment, you can indicate that to the operator, and you will be queued in line in order to commentary when the presentation is over. Muy buenas noches, yo soy Ryan Michael Atencio, y para ellos que ocupan asistencia en español, aquí estamos para servirles. Todos los materiales que vamos a exponer aquí están disponibles a través de nuestra página de web, y también puedes hacer su comentario o preguntas para nosotros. So I'll go ahead and start us off. Next slide, please. Just a little bit of background. AB 617, in response to AB 617, actually, the California Resources Board created the Community Air Protection Program. The program is about taking concrete action to reduce air pollution and burden communities. At a recent board meeting to adopt the program's implementation, CARB heard this clearly. So AB 617 requires CARB to select communities heavily impacted by air pollution for additional focused actions. These actions include setting up community air pollution monitoring systems, developing community emission reduction programs focused on cutting emissions from local pollution sources, both. These communities are exposed to multiple sources of pollution, leading to high cumulative impacts over time. Underlying the program's core focus on achieving emissions reductions and tracking ongoing progress is the need to address public health risks that may be caused by air pollution exposure. Key aspect of the law is the focus on community involvement and participation. As such, all actions will be community focused, and we aim to work with both our district partners and the community partners in this regard. Additionally, the law provided for grants to community-based organizations to participate in the AB 617 process. That is the Community Air Grants Program, and that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. And we're going to go over the process by which we implemented that program this year, and hopefully take some commentary from you folks so that we can inform the next round of grants through the solicitation.
Next slide, please. So specifically, the Community Air Grants Program was born out of California Health and Safety Code, Section 44391.2, subsection D. This requests that the State Board shall provide grants to community-based organizations for technical assistance and to support community participation in the implementation of this section, and Section 42705.5, which is AB 617. So very clearly, this has told us that we need to give technical assistance to community-based organizations for their logistical and advocacy and monitoring under the line in line with the goals of AB 617. Next slide, please, Trish. Oops. Okay, great. So through this, we were able to give grants to 4 different eligible types. The 4 types are broken as follows: a community-based organization holding a current tax-exempt status under Section 501c3 with the IRS. We also extended it to community-based organizations without 501c3 status, as long as they were partnered with an organization that had 501c3 status. We offered this to Native American tribes that are federally and California recognized, and also faith-based organizations. Next slide, please.
So again, we're talking about the first round 2017-2018 grants. So Rachel talked a little bit about the eligible types that we included in that solicitation. This slide shows the project categories and types and associated funding amounts. We had everything from informational up to $50,000, all the way through participatory type projects for up to $150,000, and finally leading up to the most technical type of proposals and projects, and those qualified for up to $500,000. Slide. So again, for 2017-2018, we're talking about here tonight. So this was a competitive grant, and so the application window was roughly from February through, I want to say, was it April? Late April?
Mid-April.
Mid-April. And it was a competitively scored, and so I think there was 65 applications received, and they were all competitively scored. And this was the scoring table. We looked at the background and project description, collaboration and leveraging, the programmatic and technical alignment, the way the concepts were integrated, budget and reporting, and then performance evaluation, and of course the timeline. Additionally, we used a scoring scale. And if you want to take a look and dive into the scoring scale that we used, we can point you to the guidelines, the 2017-2018 guidelines on our website. But effectively, we had a scoring scale from, within each, within the scoring table that you see on the screen for each of those points, we had a scale from 0 to 100%. That included grades of adequate, good, excellent, exceptional, so forth. So we really took this evaluation, ranking, and scoring piece to heart because it was a competitive solicitation. Next slide. So again, talking about 2017, 2018 grants, I just wanted to mention what happens after. What happens after these projects were ranked, scored, ranked, evaluated, scored, and ranked, and selected ultimately. What happens next is that the grantee charged with meeting the provisions of the agreement. These include things like kickoff meetings to discuss the scope and the schedule and the milestones, the terms and the conditions, the project reporting requirements, insurance requirements, resolutions from the board of that community-based organization indicating the support that that organization and that organization stands behind that proposal. For CARB, some of the responsibilities are to oversee and administer these projects, to ensure that the provisions of the agreement are met, to provide guidance to the grantee, to report project level, program level, and project level data to the California Climate Investments program, because this air grants program is under the umbrella of the California Climate Investments. So we follow the funding guidelines for that program, including the reporting requirements, and then also to ensure program requirements are met by the grantee. Slide.
So our anticipated schedule for the next round of funding starts today. We're doing public meetings and process to get feedback on last year's solicitation, but also next year's. So we will be working on putting out draft guidelines for a 30-day public comment period shortly. And then hopefully we start the next solicitation a little bit earlier than last year to give people more time to put their applications together. And we still anticipate, similarly to last year, that the project selection will be in summer 2019. Next slide, please. So now we'd like to open this up to dialogue. There are 6 questions in front of you. However, we also are open to hearing about the scoring scale, the scoring table as well. But I will read through the 6 questions and open it up for conversation. Does that sound good, Ryan?
Great.
Okay. So what were some difficulties while filling out your application? What were some useful aspects? We understand that some things we don't give enough weight to that might be helpful, or we make some things too difficult, so please let us know. Do you feel that your project was in line with the goals of AB 617? And what clarification should we use going forward on these goals? We understand that it can be a little confusing because it's 2 programs under one umbrella, so please let us know how we can help. How can we improve the application process as a whole? Please explain your understanding of the purpose of the community air grants. We'd like to know what your thoughts are. What would you like to see funded in support of AB 617, and what type of grant process is most accessible for you? We understand that there are a few different grant processes, like some first come, first serve, competitive, and a few other variations on those. So we'd like to know what your thoughts are. And lastly, how did you hear about the program? Was it through social media? Was it through a community-based organization or an air district? Please let us know.
So I think with that, we can open the line for any questions or commentary in the order of the queue requests that were received by the operator. And just a little logistical note, we scheduled this session from 5:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. And we intend to be here the whole time. We're not going to go over the presentation again, but we want to give folks a chance to call in and ask questions if they have those and they weren't able to catch the first piece of the presentation or of this webcast. Additionally, this webcast is going to be archived, so folks can access that at a later date. So if there's anything, if there's anyone in the queue, we'll take that from the operator. Otherwise, Rachel and I will be here for a bit.
If you would like to ask a question on the phone lines, please press *1 and record your name when prompted. Once again, that's *1 and record your name when prompted. Thank you.
So there was a question from the audience, and the question is, are we taking questions? Absolutely. We have microphones here, or I can repeat the question on the webcast. Let's see if we can get the mics to work.
I'm Earl Withicum with CARB. Will this same presentation and opportunity to ask questions be repeated tomorrow night from what we
Yes.
saw in the announcement?
Yes, good point, Earl. Thank you. So tomorrow night, as indicated in the announcement, we'll be running this same formatted Q&A session, learning session. So we'll give about a 10-minute introduction, the same presentation, the same material tomorrow. And then we'll be providing this opportunity again. So thank you for the reminder. Yep.
The applications that came in last year contained a number of different approaches to monitoring emissions or ambient concentrations of pollutants in various communities using a spectrum of different kinds of analytical methods, some of which were designed by consultants, some of which were designed by community groups. My sense is that within those applications, there were some ideas that were unique and creative in addressing localized problems. And I'm wondering whether any of those unique monitoring ideas or approaches have been captured in a separate document and could be made available to community groups to stimulate their design of monitoring approaches that would address the unique problems that exist in their communities.
That's a great comment, Earl. And I should mention, Earl is a staff here. He introduced himself here. He's a staff here at CARB, and he was on the team that worked with us last year as we implemented this program, and then, of course, processed the applications. And this is why Earl was referencing this piece. So I think that's a great idea. What you saw in the applications was a response to the guidelines. The guidelines were responsive in the sense that they were providing flexibility to meet organizations where they were at, not necessarily where they had to be, so they didn't have to do something that maybe they didn't have the capacity to do just to apply. We wanted to make this accessible and responsive to the needs of organizations in those communities all across the state. And so while still meeting the charge of 617 and that section of the Health and Safety Code that Rachel referenced to provide grants to community-based organizations to participate in the 617 process. And so that's a pretty wide charge, right? So the program interpreted that as to be as responsive as we can, and that means being as flexible as we could in terms of, the conceptual project types that we laid out. And you saw that we went over kind of the three general bins: informational, participatory, and technical. The bins that folks can try to derive a project from. But you're right. And when you look at the 65 applications that were received, you saw a spectrum of ideas and proposals. And unfortunately, we're only able to fund 28. But I think your point is a good one. I think somehow being able to catalog a lot of those ideas, even if they're just conceptual, even if there's a way to relate that, and maybe they weren't even selected for funding this round, but and so folks can kind of see the gamut of what's out there. I think that's a really good idea, and I think that's probably something we should look at.
So I have two things to say. I think we forgot to mention that people can email in their questions. Trish, can you confirm the email address? Okay, so it's sierra.rm@calipa.ca.gov. And Trish is in charge of those emails, so we'll be checking in with her throughout the evening. I actually wanted to ask you, Earl, how do you think we could possibly facilitate that sharing of ideas and unique ideas? I've actually heard this question a lot. How can we collaborate with some of the grantees, from other grantees? How can we connect with them? And I don't know to what capacity we could do that. Have an idea?
I have a couple. Let me start by saying that I had hoped that part of the presentation tonight would include learnings to date that ARB has gathered from the launch of these monitoring programs across the state. And so let me get back to your question, but by leading first into another question, is ARB collecting information from all of the fiscal 17-18 grantees about their progress to date, and can that information be shared?
So yes, the short answer is yes and yes. The projects that were funded were a grant agreement was created around that project, and so CARB and the project proponent, both had to sign on to that, and so we had this grant agreement. Part of the grant agreement, as we mentioned briefly, was project reporting. And so there's 4 quarterly reports, and that includes 1 annual report. And we are asking the grantees to report on things like overall project completion percentage, and then also by task. So we have a template, actually, a reporting template. And we didn't include that in the first solicitation, but I suspect that's probably something we would make available for the second round so folks can know what to expect. In the first solicitation, we had some reporting requirements and a draft agreement and a lot of other attachments, the scoring table, the scoring scale, things like this. So I suspect part of all of those will be included in the next round, and probably a little more now that we have developed the agreement further, and now that we've developed the scoring table and the scale. We had that already in there, but all of the things that we've derived since, including the reporting, I think we would look to add that in. We actually have a question, if I can, emailed in. So the question is, do we mind repeating the best guess as to when this grant solicitation will be released for the 18-19 window?
So we are anticipating late winter, early spring, so probably early February is the goal. This all depends upon feedback that we receive from other people, including you. And you can continue to email us, including me. I apologize, I keep reminding everybody of emailing with your comments after these 2 sessions at rachel.paladin, PALLATIN@arb.ca.gov. And we will, as we find a closer date, like that we know, we'll be letting everybody know that through an email.
Go ahead, Earl. No, go ahead. You were queuing these up. Go ahead.
My comment or a couple ideas in response to Rachel's question were, if the feedback we're getting now includes an identification of early challenges that recipients faced that they didn't anticipate and how they dealt with them, would be, I think, useful information to future applicants so that they don't repeat or run into the same challenges themselves without foresight. With respect to components that, or information to distribute to people considering making application, I think from a few conversations I've had with a couple district representatives who are working with community groups that have been designated to get a grant about sort of the level of understanding of the relationship between particular kinds of sources and particular kinds of emissions and air pollutant concentrations. It might be useful to have, for instance, our monitoring and laboratory division or emission inventory folks put together a list of the different kinds of facilities we find in overly burdened communities in the state, those burdened by significant industrial emissions, transportation emissions, in some case area source emissions, agricultural operations, for example, and identify for each of those categories with some specificity the types of pollution emitted, and then what kinds of monitoring methods are then appropriate for both doing initial screening measurements of concentrations within communities, and then secondly, more sophisticated analytical methods that break down these concentrations into species, for instance, as in the case of the volatile organic compounds. I think that information as sort of a primer to applicants and available to all who would consider applying would be useful in helping them design their monitoring programs and approaches as one idea.
Yeah, that's a great comment, Earl. Thank you. I will mention that the Office of Community Air Protection, which is charged with implementing 617 here at CARB, and which we are not a part of actually, we're with, our program is with the environmental justice team here at the California Resources Board. So the staff here and the staff charged with running the air grants program to support OCAP is from the EJ team under the direction of the Assistant Executive Officer, Veronica Eady, for Environmental Justice. However, OCAP, as you know, as we all know, and we talked a little bit earlier in the first slide or second slide, charged with implementing 617, and they are creating a couple of tools online. And one of those tools online is a resources page, and so there's a lot forthcoming on that resources page, and I think this is your comments. I think is one area where we can work with them to include some of this information, so future applicants can have this information in order to help them, navigate the application and kind of get a better sense of what they wanted, what's out there, right? and what they can do and what they want to do in terms of their project and what they want to propose for their community. But I will say on that resources page, which is at the OCAP webpage here at CARB, it's there. You're starting to see like lists and of different types of hardware and analytical equipment, things like this that are specific for different parameters. And so I know that they're going to continue to add to that and curate that. But that's just one piece. I think there's a lot more information on there to be had that they're going to be including. Is there a phone question? Sure. We have a phone question.
Yes, our first phone question comes from Irene Berger. Your line is open.
Hi, yes. I had a question just about, and I'm sorry if you covered this in the presentation, I dropped in a little bit late, just about more specifics on the application process and whether there's sort of like aid to the community groups and filling it out, specifically on proposing air monitoring program. It can get pretty like technical and in the weeds, and I'm wondering if there's sort of guidance or any like recommended path to consider, stationary or mobile monitoring, those kinds of things. And then I also wanted to know when you have to use the money by, if you do receive the grant. Is it like within 3 years, or when does that have to be utilized? And my last question, sorry, was also so whether, as far as partners, whether, like the city can be a partner in the application process with a community group. So thanks.
Irene, just one question. Can you tell us which organization you're with?
I'm with LA City.
Okay. Thank you. Ryan, did you?
Sure.
We're still
yeah.
writing. Give us a second.
Thanks, Henry, for your questions. I'm just noting these down. In terms of technical assistance for community groups that want to propose community air monitoring, when we put the grants out for the first year, we wanted to kind of meet. There was a demand there, and we wanted to be able to get that solicitation out and get the funding out as soon as we could. And so there wasn't I guess, a public, like a draft available. And so I think this year we're probably going to have to we're going to do a more of a public process. And things like technical assistance for filling out the applications, I think is probably something we'll be trying to do as much as we can, and mechanisms to do that by, I think we're open to suggestion. I will say that I was mentioning earlier in a discussion here with someone in the room, there is on the OCAP's webpage, there is a resources page that talks about things like monitoring, types of monitoring hardware. So that was one thing that we can point to. Last year, we pointed to South Coast AQMD's sensor evaluation page in the guidelines. And so in the application itself, we referenced, to what extent is your, project, if you are choosing to do a technical type of project, has the equipment been, evaluated by, or is it listed in the evaluations page with South Coast, or are you, what groups are you proposing to work with that have this background, or things like this. And so what we saw a lot in terms of the applications received was that groups partnered with other groups that had experience, or they were able to propose to work with contractors that had this experience. And so there's those, I just wanted to point those out in terms of technical assistance, but in terms of what CARB can do to help folks apply, I think we can do a better job this round, and I think we are planning to do that through more outreach events, and then also through having more of a draft and a public process and a draft available. Your second question was, when does the money have to be utilized? Usually I think it's 3 years.
That's correct.
Yeah, it's 3 years, and that was part of the language, legislative language. And then the last question you had was, can community-based organizations partner with municipalities and cities? And the answer is yes. These grants are for community-based organizations, but they also are to develop and to build the capacity of these organizations in terms of who they partner with, and in creating a fabric of capacity around these communities. And that includes partnering, with cities. We've seen groups, community-based organizations partnering with cities already. So that avenue is available. It's not exclusive to municipalities, but the grants are for community-based organizations.
And I'd like to add on to that. Last year, we saw a variety of different partnerships. A lot of them were more in the narrative of the grant, but for the most part, it was 501c3s or 501c3s partnering with other 501c3s, as well as a few tribes. But we saw consultants, we saw universities. There was a lot of different collaboration. So we're not limiting on that as long as the base requirements are met.
Okay, thank you. And well, if someone else has a question, then go ahead. But I do have a follow-up question.
Oh, go ahead, Irene. I think we have time.
And I'm seeing on the presentation the application process begins in February. Is that right? And goes through April.
Wait, what was the question?
She's asking about the solicitation. We just answered that right before you got on. We're hoping for early February, but it's a little bit flexible still. We will have a more nailed down time frame as our review goes on and as we receive more comments and build our next year's solicitation package.
And then it's probably gonna end sometime in April, so you're gonna have that time.
When it ends depends on, working backwards, right? We want to get the draft guidelines out. We want to have more of a public process. And then we want to have more time for the solicitation window. So last year, it did end in April, but that doesn't mean it'll end in April this year.
Okay.
So we put the solicitation start date late winter, early spring. But ultimately, if you look at the selection date, we're aiming for summer. You can kind of see, sometime between spring and summer is when the window would be.
Okay, thank you.
Sure thing. So we have some questions coming in on email, so I'll start. We have a queue here, so I'll start going through those. So this is a question regarding community air grants in coordination with air districts. For the technical category, how is CARB planning to coordinate with the districts? And how is CARB going to be coordinating throughout the project so that these data can be meaningful? So in the original guidelines last year, we had a kind of a Venn diagram with the communities, CARB, and the districts, because underpinning 617 is this community-focused, a community focus, but clearly, CARB and the districts need to be working hand in hand on that as we focus on in these communities and 617 in general. And so we aim to do that specifically for technical type projects. we're working with the districts where, to the extent, number one, that the grantee is amenable, number one, and if there's ways that we can bring both of these parties to the table, we'll do that. But even if we can't bring them to the same table, we want to facilitate that relationship between the grantee, not just technical, but the grantees doing all kinds of projects in the basin, for that district. So as it happens, there are some projects in some basins that, in some communities that are also selected communities. However, in some basins, there's projects in communities that are not selected communities. So we don't want to exclude or disadvantage any community, because these grants are not mutually exclusive to selected communities. So we wanted to be able to facilitate these working relationships with these air grants in all the communities and all the, across the basins with the districts and CARB. So I think functionally, how do you do that? Obviously, you do that by communicating with the districts, which I think we can probably do better. I'll say that. But I also think that we need to make it a point to work with the grantees to let them know kind of what is going on at the district level. So these grants are for community-based organizations, and this is a community-focused effort. So we really want to be mindful and respectful of the communities that receive this grant. And so that's part of our approach as well. In terms of how CARB will support the projects, throughout the life of the project, so that these data are meaningful, there's a couple of different ways. CARB, one of the ways is CARB is going to be providing guidance, technical guidance to these grantees that have technical components, monitoring components, when they want to, folks that are proposing to do, community air monitoring, for instance. We have staff liaisons from the monitoring lab division on the grants team for each grant that has a monitoring component. And we have a blueprint that talks about specifically how to set up a community air monitoring network. The blueprint, of course, is geared towards the districts, but we think that the 14 elements laid out in the blueprint is a pretty good model to follow for folks that have the capacity to do that. And so there's other models out there, but we think that's a really, really great tool. And so we're providing guidance on how folks can start to meet those elements in the blueprint in these air grants. And in terms of ongoing, the grantees are going to, we'll be able to collect this data, and eventually we'd like to be able to display this data, provided that it is meeting the quality that is necessary to be able to display it. And even if it's not of such a quality, I think there's value in at least displaying it and perhaps or making sure folks know that the data is there. There's ways we can integrate the data that's collected or point folks to those community networks. Some groups are proposing to create like a network where they are displaying this data real time. We'd like to be able to do this, and in fact, that's one of the things that's going to happen with district-led monitoring. So we'd encourage air grantees and those technical projects to follow the same 14 elements. We plan on providing technical guidance and assistance to these grantees through the life of the project. I just want to go through a couple of these, and then we can open it up for questions on the phone, just so we can kind of go back and forth. There was a few here that have been queued up. We have another question here via email. All right, another question here. This question is regarding the bins that I mentioned. I mentioned the three bin. That's an inelegant way to put it, but there was kind of types, categories, conceptual categories. There was informational, participatory, and technical. So I said 3 bins. And so the question is, does it skew toward one bin or another? And what have we noticed? So I think we clearly saw a skew toward projects that wanted to do monitoring. Not all of them do, but a lot of them did. And the second part of that question is there a minimum number of projects that would be funded within each bin? Is this something that CARB is considering? I think we talked a little bit about this when we were reading the guidelines previously, but I think this is a good comment to carry forward into the process for next year as well, because when you talk about skewing towards, one bin or the other, I think there's value in all 3. That's why we laid them out. It's not simply a dollar amount and go out and get the most dollars. I think there's value at every level and every part of that spectrum. So I think this is a really good comment, and we're going to carry it forward. So thank you for that.
And if you have any more input on that topic, please feel free to send it to me at my email address, rachel.palatin@arb.ca.gov. Thank you.
There's another question here. There's several questions in this comment. So the question is, for unsuccessful proposals, is there a process to access the evaluation of the proposal? Is there any way to get feedback on our effort? I think we can do that, and I think we can either do it systematically, or we can do it one-on-one. Obviously, when you have 65 applications and there was 28 that were ultimately funded, you see the difference there. So there's 30-something projects that were not able to be funded. And so I think we can probably look at that. I think that's a good idea. Other question here, could CARB provide a form to match monitoring needs with communities, that is, affected communities, matching them with organizations possessing the expertise to meet those needs? This is one of our biggest challenges. I think that's a great comment. I think that goes back to the conversation in the room earlier, where how can we help folks that don't necessarily know where to start or where to begin or have the capacity to put a proposal together that imagines the things that they want to do and how to do it. So I think this is a great comment. I think we'll take it forward, obviously. I don't want to give any kind of off-the-cuff half remark, but I think there's a lot of good commentary here, and I think we'll take it forward. There's 2 other questions here. Are there performance evaluations of the grants that have been released based on the timelines that were included in the proposal? And what is the consequence of not meeting the milestones in the project? So these are Along with, the grants, the grant agreement requires, stipulates, I guess, or requires, I would say, reporting. So there's reporting that's required pursuant to the agreement. There's a lot of other requirements. So if you don't meet those requirements, we can do everything up to ultimately, and this is not something that is, folks, want to see or that we want to do, but ultimately, and it's in the guidelines that CARB can terminate the agreement. So I mean, there is consequences, but this is not something that is taken lightly. This is not something that's in the works or in the plans, but the provisions are laid out in the agreement for folks to do what they said that they were going to do, what they signed up to do, what they were funded to do. And our grant managers are going to be making sure that they live up to what they said they were going to do in their project proposals. And so we can gauge this through their reporting.
I'd also like to note that we are working with our grantees to amend anything that needs to be amended. So if things aren't being able to be met, we're welcome to working with people to make sure that we make adjustments to make sure the project is still successful.
Question in the room?
This is Earl Withycombe from CARB. Not a question, but another response to Rachel's question about how do we further empower applicants to improve the quality of their applications. And Ryan, you mentioned that our OCAP team is building a website with a number of tools available to community groups to access and use.
Right.
I wanted to relay an experience that I've had in making available a similar tool in our planning division, which is our database of real-time air quality monitoring data. People from environmental justice groups and tribes that I work with in the Imperial Valley area have asked me, where do I find what's in my air now?
Right.
And I've steered them to our site, which is called Air Quality Information System, or AQMIS, ACMIS. And the response I've gotten back more often than not is, it's too difficult to navigate. I don't understand what questions or what options I should be pursuing. And I found myself writing scripts to respond to specific questions like, what was the air quality in the southern Coachella Valley on October 15th when we had a windstorm of this year, for example? And I think by anticipating the kinds of information people will want from these tools and writing scripts in a way that are easier for people to follow than just to go into the tool and try to understand the jargon in our very complex field may help empower them to make actual advantage of those tools. And another concept that comes to mind is to develop something like a flow diagram, a tree flow diagram with a starting point, which is the entry point, and then at each branch, linking that branch to a script that contains screen prints, for example, to show people how to get to that branch in a way that will be successful, that sort of steps them through the actual toggles and radio buttons, et cetera, in our complex tools that we've developed. And something like that I found useful in developing in my own work for
right.
people from the communities who don't have
Yeah.
the sophistication or previous understanding and knowledge and education in this complex field of air pollution that we work in daily.
Right, yeah, that's a great point. I mean, sometimes the solution can get so complicated it becomes part of the problem. And I think we want to try to minimize the complexity in that regard and make things easy, user-friendly and easy to use. So thank you for that. A couple more comments, the emails that came in online. There was another comment, a follow-up comment regarding the bins. Again, the project types, whether they be informational, participatory, or technical. This commenter is saying it may be worth looking at the scoring criteria to make sure it doesn't skew toward more technical projects. Has CARB considered providing a minimum number of projects to be funded for each bin? So again, great comment. We first round of funding, I think we talked about what kind of projects we wanted to see, but really everything was brand new. And so we didn't know the response. We anticipated we see a lot of different type of projects like we spoke earlier here in the room, but there was no minimum for each project type. So this is the second comment on this. So thank you for that, and I think it's something we'll take with us as we begin to develop the next round solicitation. This comment is regarding are there guidelines? Actually, it's asking, are there guidelines for communities to identify suitable instrumentation for their monitoring? And then is there guidelines or is there any guidance for how to gather measurements that will be meaningful, factoring wind direction, sources, et cetera? So a couple things on this. I'll start with the second piece on how to gather measurements that will be meaningful. I referenced earlier the document that was put together and presented in September to the board here at the Air Resources Board, the blueprint. And part of the blueprint talks about implementing a community air monitoring network. And the specific appendix, I think is Appendix E or something in that blueprint. It's the 14 elements that the group here, the Office of Community Air Protection, put that together. And so I think this is something that can provide guidance on exactly that, how to make these data meaningful. Our folks in OCAP and the Monitoring Lab Division worked long and hard to put that together, and it's a resource that we point the grantees to almost every time we talk about these things. So I will say that's probably something we can highlight up front for the next round. And we've heard commentary actually integrating that into the guidelines. I'm not saying it will be, but we've heard comments to that effect. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad idea. I think that's something we're probably looking at and to consider. In terms of helping communities identify suitable instrumentation for their monitoring, I mentioned earlier the resources page that the Office of Community Air Protection here at CARB is putting together. So they actually have a listing of different, or they're putting together, excuse me, it might be on there now, or it is in the process of instrumentation or methodologies, analytical methods. One thing that we pointed to in terms of suitable instrumentation, again, in the guidelines that we have now, and they're on the web now for last year, excuse me, was the AQ spec sensor for South Coast Air Quality Management District. So they AQ spec, we referenced that in our guidelines, so I'll mention it here. It's it's a center where that district evaluates these low-cost sensors. So I don't know if this comment is talking about just low-cost sensors or all instrumentation for monitoring. But we pointed to some of these as references in the guidelines previously. And I think we can probably, do a better job of providing, more guidance up front to help applicants.
I did want to make a note. We keep referencing OCAP and the Office of Community Air Protection. That is our office here at the California Air Resources Board that is charged with the California Air Protection Program. Just like we're the Environmental Justice Unit, but we run the Community Air Grants Program. So there are a few different acronyms. If anybody gets confused about that, please let us know. Thank you.
You want to check the phone lines, Trish? Do you know if there's any?
There are no questions on the phone line, but for anyone joining us late, if you would like to ask a question, please press *1 and record your name when prompted. Thank you.
Sure thing.
This is Earl Withicum again with CARB. And again, another idea in response to Rachel's question about tools that will empower community groups. There are a number of databases that we in the air pollution field work with that, when combined, could be of value to community groups. And I'm thinking of the databases that show the locations of all district permitted industrial facilities and the corresponding database that shows the toxic emissions coming from those facilities. We also have at the federal level the TRI database, the Toxic Release Inventory database, which shows the locations and quantities of toxic materials that are either stored, created, processed, or destroyed at facilities with specific locations throughout the United States. We also have databases from Caltrans, for example, and from city and county departments of transportation that show truck volumes on segments of freeways, highways, and roadways. And when a question came up at the launch of a community discussion and creation of a steering committee for the South Sacramento environmental justice project that was led by the local air district, I suggested to the air district that they might have one of their engineers compile that data into a map with a sort of bubbles showing by size the risk associated with emissions from roadway links, from industrial facilities, from facilities that attract large numbers of trucks, distribution centers, for example, to give people a sense of what types of emissions, toxic emissions, were going into the air, what their quantities were in a spatial scale, and where those emission points or areas were located. This is not an easy or quick piece of work, but my thinking was in this discussion that such a map would be invaluable to help orient community members who are participating in these steering committees and groups that are interested in putting together applications to either monitor or address in one fashion or another the more serious air quality impacts in their communities.
Right. So there's a lot there. I will say I just have a question. So you're asking, or one of the points you brought up was what might be useful is like a map showing risk by facility type. Is that right?
Risk, admitted risk by specific facility.
All right, okay, okay. Yeah, I think I only brought that up because I know in some community steering committees, meetings that I've attended, there's only been a few. There's only been like, I think, one or two, maybe some communities are on their third meeting this month, but some of the districts are, mentioning, what might be useful to focus on in terms of like risk there in that community, right? Whether it's truck traffic or permitted facilities or stationary. I know that there's kind of those there's that going on at some of the steering committee level, but I also think that's probably pretty useful for folks that are maybe not at the steering committee table and they're in other parts of the basin advocating for their community for next year, right? Or for these air grants, for instance. So I think that's a useful comment.
If I can follow up, I think from your point, I'm thinking that if potential applicants for community air grants reach out to their respective air districts and ask them for this kind of information, that will help them gain insight as to the problems in their communities that they may not otherwise recognize because most air pollution is invisible.
And thank you so much for that, Earl. I've actually heard from a few different air grant recipients that they, in fact, did do that or are doing it actively now. Obviously, people can also reach out to us. I think that that's important, that we are available for information. Even when we can't answer specific questions on the air grants themselves, we can answer questions or guide them to experts at ARB to help them with their understanding, not necessarily their application, but their understanding of the pollution risks.
I want to check the phone lines if there's any queues, questions or comments queued.
Unfortunately, there are no questions on the phone line.
Because we do have some via email, so I can maybe address those here in a second.
There are no questions on the phone lines.
Okay, thank you. So we have a couple of emailed questions. Number one, what is the total budget for the 2019 grant program? And that is $5 million. Number two, will the grant categories be the same as they were in 2018? We don't know yet. It's not final. The guidelines are not final. We anticipate that you'll probably see some of the same categories. Number three, will the minutes from both sessions be available through the CARB website? Yes, these are going to be archived. These webcasts will be archived. Number four, are the successful 2018 proposals available publicly? And if so, are there project descriptions available to the public? And if so, how can they be read? So there's project descriptions available on our website right now for each of the funded projects, the 28. The proposals available publicly. We haven't posted the proposals yet. Know that folks, that would probably be a tool that would help folks, and so we're, discussing whether to post those. That probably be something that we can discuss. I think we're trying to first, once these agreements are executed, and most of them have, but there's a few that have not yet. So once they're all executed, I think this is something we first want to be able to share with our district counterparts for those projects in those basins. And then we can, I think, talk about how we want to make these publicly available.
And as for the project descriptions, they have actually been archived more or less. If you go to our main page, it's at the bottom of the page as Community Air Grants 2018. Again, you can reach out to me and I can help you. I am the webmaster, so I have intimate knowledge of how everything's organized. Thank you.
There's another question that came in. Was CalEnviroscreen tool used in the scoring process of the applications? And the answer is yes, because scores or projects located in and benefiting disadvantaged and low-income communities were scored higher than those that didn't, if all else is equal. And then also, in the application, we asked folks to list the benefits, expected benefits to the CalEnviroscreen, CalEPA identified disadvantaged or low-income communities, and that was part of the scoring table. So yes, it was. There's another comment here. So I'll just summarize this comment. The commenter is mentioning that we should focus on measuring the hundreds of suspected chemicals, including toxic metals. Once we do this, then we can look at health impact studies and maybe get more accurate monitoring equipment and be able to educate the public better. And then this in turn might let folks choose a more appropriate technology for to reduce exposure. So the commenter might be talking about, well, there's a lot there, but talking about monitoring and then also talking about that monitoring informing health and then also emission reduction technologies for those emitting sources. Question?
This is Earl Withicum with CARB. Not a question, but a follow-up. At about 16 sites throughout California, we collect filter samples of ambient fine particulate and analyze it for 32 toxic metals by species. That data, those filters are collected once every 6 days, so it's not continuous monitoring, but we have that data going back, these stations are distributed throughout the state. We have that data going back probably about 10 years. So if anyone who wants to see a file or receive a file of that data will contact Rachel. She'll get the message to the appropriate staff person at ARB, and we can send them that data file.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you referring to the, is it the SLAMS network, or which one is?
The SLAMS network is the network where we monitor for compliance with the federal air quality standards. But as a part of that, we monitor, one of the federal standards is for fine particulate, so-called PM 2.5, and we analyze the PM 2.5 filters from a subset of all of the PM 2.5 monitors. We analyze a subset of the filters from those for toxic metals. So if people are interested in knowing the levels of toxic metals in their region, not necessarily their neighborhood or community, we can supply them with a file, again, going back, I think, about 10 years.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's very interesting and a good point. So if folks on the line or on the webcast heard that commentary, and they have questions, they can direct them to Rachel, and Rachel will put you in touch with staff or get you that a link or more information. So I guess we can take a quick pause and check if there's any calls queued up online or if there's any emails we received, Trish? If there's any calls queued?
No, there are no phone line questions.
Thank you, operator. Okay, so it's 6:45. Like I mentioned earlier, we planned to be here till 7:30, so we can hold the lines open and the webcast open. We don't have any more information to present. But I will remind you, tomorrow at 5:30, the same exact information is going to be presented again. Both of these sessions will be taped and archived on our website. So we can hold the lines open for any commentary or question or emails. What's the email address again, Trish?
I'm Rachel.
I
It's sierra@calipa.ca.gov.
Thank you, Rachel. We'll hang out for a bit. So is there a question queued on the phone, operator?
There is. Irene, your line is open.
Hi, yes. So this is like sort of related, but the last comment from Earl made me think about it. Is there specific information from one of the offices in ARB on so any source apportionment studies that give you concentration percentages for particulate matter or NOx, and whether you have that information so that those kinds of studies for specific regions in California. And I think that might be something that would be useful, I think, for community groups to take a look at, to understand sort of what the breakout of the sources of the concentration levels of PMR. But so my specific question is, sorry, there's a lot there, but is there an office in ARB that has conducted source apportionment studies? And can that be, for example, I'm interested in LA City. Is there specific information on LA City for that?
Thank you, Irene. Pass the mic to Earl. I don't know if you had anything on that.
This is Earl Withicum again from ARB's Air Quality Planning Division. Yes, there are source receptor studies published in each air quality plan that's been adopted by the local air district with jurisdiction. In the case of LA City, it would be South Coast Air Quality Management District. Those plans, once developed at the local level, include technical analyses that are done by their resources board. And both South Coast AQMD, because of its size and sophistication, does source receptor analyses, as do we here at the Air Resources Board, and our joint studies are published in each of these plans. With respect to NOx emissions and its contribution to both ozone concentrations and to fine particulate concentrations, those analyses are contained in the once every 3-year air quality plans that are developed and approved by the South Coast AQMD. The most recent one was adopted in 2016. They're called Air Quality Management Plans, or AQMPs, and you can find them on the South Coast website under Air Quality Plans, or if you send an email to Rachel Paladin, we can forward you the link to where those plans are located on various web pages that ARB maintains. There are also a number of source-receptor relationships that are done by independent researchers, academicians, consulting groups, focused on unique issues that are not necessarily parts of air quality plans. And there's a significant literature, if you start Googling for source receptor relationships or studies. But otherwise, again, we can help you, point you to where those chapters are located in air quality plans from urban areas across California to help answer your questions.
Yeah. So I've actually been speaking with AQMD. They said they haven't done specific studies on source apportionment since the 2008. Well, actually, it was the 2008 MATE study. They did source apportionment there. But what we're looking for specifically is, the breakdown of different categories. So contribution from, diesel truck emissions, contribution from like industry, from rail yards, and not emissions. They have done studies on emissions rates, but not specific source apportionment that gives you concentration levels recently. So I just thought I'd ask to see if that was something CARB has done. They thought that CARB probably hasn't done that recently either, but that's a good idea to see if there are any academic institutions or consultants that have done those studies. And sorry, this is sort of off topic, so I'm sorry.
No, great commentary, Irene. Thank you. You've given us a lot to take back. I did want to point out, for not in a specific in response to the source apportionment commentary, but again, I mentioned earlier the Office of Community Air Protections. I mentioned this resource that was online, and it's actually, I just want to clarify, it's the Online Resource Center. So if you go to the Online Resource Center, a lot of some of the commentary that we heard via email and some on the phone was asking about tools that potential applicants can use now to help inform their application for the next round. Things like air monitoring, measurement technologies, existing community monitoring systems, community monitoring plan assistance. I mean, these items are on that online resource center put together by the OCAP team and the Monitoring Lab Division right now. And that's accessible through CARB's website under Community Air Monitoring. So if you go to CARB and you go to OCAP, Office of Community Air Protection, on the left, you'll see an online resource center link. You can go there. And it's going to be, it's an iterative process. It's going to be continually added to and curated. I'm sure there's a lot that's going to go up there. And we're actually working with some of the team that's putting part of these pieces together for the online resource. So any commentary folks have on that, you can let us know or let the OCAP program know, and that can go to help informing that resource center to make it as useful and meaningful as it can be. We have 5 minutes to 7, so I think we have about 35 more minutes here on the line. And so we'll leave the lines open if there's commentary or questions. Um, Okay. And if there's any email questions, we'll be here till 7:30. So we do have an email here. I'll go ahead and read this note. Can you give us any previews on what you anticipate may be different in the 2019 RFP compared to the 2018 version? So RFP, the request for proposals, I think we're calling it first of all, a solicitation. So we're calling it the guidelines. We want to do, the first thing that comes to mind is we want to do like a more of a public process using a draft, so the draft guidelines. So that was different than the 28, the previous first year version, 17-18 guidelines. To continue to kind of garner this input and things that we can consider, potentially change, make the program better. I mean, we've heard actually quite a bit already tonight, but we're going to have this opportunity tomorrow, and then we're going to have other opportunities throughout January and February, and then we're planning to have this draft publicly available as well. So to me, that part is the most, jumps out as what immediately would be different than the previous guidelines. Specifically, I don't know beyond that I would anticipate major differences. There could be. We've heard a lot tonight about scoring and the bins. I think that's probably one thing we want to look at. We heard a lot about helping folks to be able to apply. And so I think that's probably something that might look a little different this round as well in terms of outreach, on the front end. And I think we heard a lot about the resources available for grantees or folks, potential grantees online through things like the Online Resource Center or other resources that we can point them to. So I think you might see the rollout a little different, at least just to start. That's kind of what jumps out at me.
I also would like to say, if anyone has any specific comments, I've heard in conversations some specific comments about the scoring criteria table, and as well as the categories or bins, whichever way we go with that or what we call them. So if you do have specific comments, you are more than welcome to send them over to us. Thank you.
So again, I just wanted to mention to the folks online or in the call or just calling in and just tuning in and maybe didn't catch the beginning of the meeting. I'm Ryan Atencio, and I'm with CARB's Environmental Justice team here at their Resources Board. And Rachel Palatin is my colleague here. We gave a little presentation on the front end right around 5:30, and then we've been taking commentary, comments, and questions on the air grants program since that time. So we're going to be here till 7:30. I did want to say, in terms of comments, if you had comments now, you can call in. By the way, I just want to be able to give everybody the number, so maybe we can repeat that for folks that are watching that don't maybe know the number. But for the email, Rachel's going to remind us here, the email in the room. Remind me the email.
SierraRM@calipa.ca.gov.
And if you happen to be watching one of these archive sessions, you can always email Rachel at rachel.palatin, that's Pallatin @arb.ca.gov, regarding questions or comments on the air grants program. Additionally, we have a program email for the Office of Community Air Protection. It's communityair@arb.ca.gov. So that's communityair@arb.ca.gov. And if you put community air grants in the subject line, it'll get to us.
And Ryan, you said if anybody is listening but would like to call in at this time, the number is 888-848-6509, and the passcode is 3676220. And this is on the Community Air Protection Program events page. Thank you.
So we'll be here till 7:30, and then this program will be archived, and then we're going to present the same information tomorrow night from 5:30 to 7:30, providing the same time slot for commentary or questions you might have.
Trish has suggested that we repeat the dialogue questions, and I think that's a great idea because most of our conversation has not been connected to them, which is not a bad thing at all, but maybe we could get some feedback on those. So I'll just kind of lightly go through them. Number one is, what were some difficulties when filling out your application, and what were some useful aspects? Number two, do you feel that your project was in line with the goals of AB 617? And what clarification should we use going forward on the goals in case you don't know if you were in line with AB 617? How can we improve the application process as a whole? Can you this number four kind of goes back to number two. Can you please explain your understanding of the purpose of the community air grants? Number five, what would you like to see funded in support of AB 617? So which types of projects would you personally like to see funded outside of your own? And which type of grant process is most accessible for you? And lastly, how did you hear about the program? Was it through social media, through a friend, through a community-based organization, an air district, or something else? I don't know. Please let us know. Thank you.
And we do have a question from the phone line. Ms. Rosenberger, your line is open.
Yes, my question is, I found a piece of equipment, like a rental piece of equipment costing $750 a month. How would I get it checked out by the South Coast Air Quality Management Division? How would they they can compare it to the other equipment there and tell me if it's a good piece of equipment in a reasonable amount of time? But I don't remember exactly. I have to go look at my papers again, but I'll give it to you tomorrow.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I'm trying to, I just want to make sure I understand it. You asked, if you're still on the line, you asked, how can you get a piece of equipment that you purchased evaluated by an air district?
Before purchasing the equipment, because I don't have the money for the equipment, I want to know if it's a good piece of equipment to write in my grant proposal.
I
so
see.
They need to evaluate it first.
Right.
Evaluate
So
the equipment.
I see.
Grant.
So is it a like a low cost sensor that you're looking
Yes.
at? Okay, so in the guidelines we reference an online resource put out by the South Coast Air Quality Management District called AQ Spec, and they evaluate certain sensors through that program. It's not a CARB program; it's a South Coast AQMD program. But they evaluate some of those hardware, and then they post those evaluations on their website. So we can give you the website right now. I can actually go there. Let me type it up, and I'll get you that. Stay on the line.
Additionally, while Ryan is researching that, Laura, you can definitely contact your local air district. And if you email me, I can probably put you in touch with some of our monitoring people as well. I've heard from your district a few times that they're happy to work with the community members. So, and Ryan has it ready now.
Sure thing. So again, I mentioned this because we referenced it in our guidelines. This isn't to kind of place any obligation other than this is just a public tool that's available, and it's very, very handy. And we really like it, and we pointed a lot of the applicants to it last year. And so again, South Coast AQMD runs this Air Quality Sensor Performance Evaluation Center. It's a great tool, and the address, the web address is www.aqmd.gov/AQ-spec, SPEC.
Yes, so how long will it take them to test the equipment? If I can recommend a certain equipment from a certain company, would they test it right away? Would they take a long time? Then I have to get my grant papers in.
Sure. Yeah, it looks like they do these evaluations on hardware. It doesn't, I don't know if they might, I don't think they take, I don't know, you'd have to contact them actually. First of all, preface that. You should probably get in touch with them, and there's contact info there. But I don't know if they like take a piece of hardware from the public. I think they look at different technologies and different sensors and different types of sensors from different vendors. So I think you should check it out and see if the one that you're considering is something that they've already evaluated, and they publish these and they post these evaluations. So if it's not on there, I think you might want to get in touch with them and contact and ask them if they plan to do that and when so. But that's not a CARB program. That is a South Coast Air Quality Management District program. So I would defer to them on speaking to those points. Thank you.
I've seen some low-cost sensors not on the list, and I've been interested in some of those.
Right. There's, I mean, I think they're recently updating and adding as they go along. Thank you.
Thanks. Oh, also, is Rachel Palatine there?
Yes, I am.
Oh, yes. I wanted that information about the toxic metals, about the 16 centers where they test for metals and they do the
Yes.
collect the dust samples and analyze them. I'd like that information.
Can you forward your email that you sent to the
right.
Sierra room over to my email? You have it. We've talked before.
Yes, my computer is dead right now, but I did
Okay.
send something from my address already, lauragreen.rosenberger@gmail.com.
I'll make sure I pass that along and get an answer to you.
Thanks.
You're welcome, Laura.
Computer's out of batteries right now.
I understand.
Thank you, Laura. We have your contact information, and we can follow up with you.
Should I send anything else later?
I'm sorry?
Should I send any of this information later? You will take care of it based on the email I sent before.
We'll be in touch with you. If I need more information, I can give you an email. But I will do my best with what you've already given us.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so we have about 15 minutes left for this session for any commentary or emailed questions, and then we're going to close the session and then archive this. And then tomorrow, December the 19th, we're going to offer another 2-hour learning session, and we'll present a little bit of information in the beginning of the meeting tomorrow starting at 5:30, and then again hold the webcast and phone lines open until 7:30. And that one will also be archived. So we'll be here for another about 15 minutes. Sí, muy buenas noches. Nomás para recordarles que para ellos que ocupan asistencia en español, aquí estamos para servirles y además puedes mandar un correo electrónico al airecomunitario@arb.ca.gov. And additionally, we have another emailed commentary. So this commenter is asking about what kind of community outreach CARB is currently doing for the Office of Community Air Protection, and what types of efforts are used for these workshops, and how might technology or social media help increase community engagement. For example, advances in GIS, which might help to understand survey responses spatially and combine that information with air toxics data or demographic data to better understand and anticipate different regional concerns, and especially to help communities that are particularly vulnerable to and better facilitate AB 617 community engagement. Oh, that's a great comment. And we're going to keep your contact information here, web commenter, so thank you. A couple things. So again, in terms of outreach that CARB is doing currently for the Office of Community Air Protection, we are with another group here at CARB that works to support the Office of Community Air Protection, OCAP. So I know that they recently went to the board in September. That was the big board meeting where they presented that group, OCAP, Office of Community Air Protection, presented the staff recommendations for communities to be selected under AB 617, and then also the blueprint document. So both those are final now. You can find more info at the website, but I think leading up to that, OCAP and our team helping OCAP did a lot of work throughout the spring and summer of 2018 this year, towards the end of last year, and then starting in spring of this year. We did a lot of community meetings. I can't say off the top of my head, I should know, but we definitely have a number. We know where we met, how many times we met in different communities. We would again, this is OCAP. They have a whole team dedicated to setting up these meetings, and so they a lot of times there would be like a World Cafe type of approach. I think OCAP and the EJ team were trying to find what works best for different communities, because different things do work in different places. Regarding accessibility, time, things like this. And so, but we can always do better. We know that we can always do better. So I appreciate the commentary, and I think we can work with OCAP, because OCAP is going to start again next year doing these community outreach events, and we're going to be working with them. So I think that's going to start in the early. Well, I don't know. I don't want to put a time frame on it, but it's going to be next year, and we're going to be helping them with that. And I don't want to speak further for their program.
As for us, we are working on doing more and more social media and outreach. We have a specific outreach person. This was not as well, I admit, as well advertised as I would have liked it, but we will be working on improving that over the next coming weeks on our subsequent meetings and the draft solicitation that we will be releasing. So we'll be working on Twitter and through local CBOs and be available for questions.
And then in terms of your comment on just your example, actually, using GIS to help understand survey responses as it relates to demographic or pollution data, that's a great commentary, actually. So I think this is something I'm going to take back for our team and for OCAP and share with them. So thank you very much. And again, We read these comments out kind of anonymously, but we have your information here. You can always get in touch with Rachel or myself if you want to talk further, but I'm going to take this because it's a really good comment, so thank you.
And we did have another phone question come in. Ms. Rosenberger, your line is open.
Yes.
Ms. Rosenberger, your line is open.
Laura, are you there?
My question.
Laura?
Well,
Laura,
that was my
are you
first
there?
question. I'm going to clarify the first question. My first question about the time of all, like in the beginning to do more monitoring with low-cost sensors, and then later to do the research studies and the more expensive sensors and the ways to reduce exposure and everything, and like the clean, like clean vehicles and clean barbecue grills and things like clean grills and cafeterias and things like that later. Because the time is the issue. Like the beginning, the first 6 months have 6 month grants, and rather than year grants.
Hey, Laura, can I actually email you and we can talk about this? 'Cause we can't hear you that well, but you and I can schedule a follow-up call.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so for those on the webcast or on the phone, we have about 5 more minutes here with the open lines, open phone, and then we're going to be holding another session tomorrow. Both of these sessions are going to be archived. Tomorrow's 5:30 to 7:30. The same information is going to be presented in the beginning of the meeting, and then we're going to open up the line for comments and questions. Right now on the screen, you're seeing the online resource center from the Office of Community Air Protection. And so we just wanted to show a little bit about, we keep mentioning this tool online. So we wanted to show you what we were talking about, things like a technology clearinghouse, for instance, on back determinations across, different districts and basins. That's just one part. There's other pieces to the resource center. So by all means, please do check that out. That's accessible at the Community Air Protection Program webpage at CARB's site. Thank you. So again, on the screen, if you were just showing the online resource center. So we've talked a lot about it tonight, actually. So it's pretty clear that this is something that applicants might want to look at as they consider proposing projects for, the next round of community air grants. But not just for air grants. I mean, it's a tool, steering committees and for districts and for anybody in any community in the state right now. So that's what you're seeing on your screen. Okay, so just to remind everybody on the webcast or online, we've come to the end of this listening session here at 7:30. We're going to go ahead and close off the lines and archive this session. So anything that you've heard or anything we've discussed here is going to be archived. We went over some material in the beginning of the meeting, and we took some questions and commentary online via email and in the room here. And on the phone. So tomorrow, December the 19th at 5:30 p.m., we're going to hold the second listening session. We're going to present the same information, and that meeting is also going to be webcast with a phone line as well. And you can email your questions in, and all of that session will be archived as well. Thank you very much for joining us here at the California Resources Board for this discussion on the community air grants to support the AB 617 Community Air Protection Program here at CARB. Have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you.
This concludes your conference call, and you may disconnect. Once again, your conference call has ended, and you may disconnect. Thank you for joining.